another episode from Your Own Pathway Leadership and Mental Well-Being. For those who don't know me, my name is Paya. I'm a licensed psychotherapist and trauma informed leadership consultant, and I help leaders realign to their values to rebuild trust because leadership is not just about performance, it's about how power impacts people. So let's own it. Today's episode. Today's episode was an episode that I actually wanted to do in 2025, but so much has changed since then. And it's a good thing I did not do this episode because um a lot has changed, and a lot has changed because when I originally planned to record this episode, back then I framed it as why your people don't like you. But as I've matured professionally and build and develop my presence based organizational realignment consultant framework, and as I've worked with leaders and processed countless therapy conversations about moral injury and struggles and issues within the work organization, I realized something deeper, that leadership, when leaders talked about what some of their struggles were, it wasn't about being liked. And I want to also say that not just leaders but people working under the leaders, it wasn't just about liking the leader for their personality. It was actually, all of this was about integrity. Because when integrity fractures under power, that's when trust erodes. So, yes, today's episode, I'm still going to use the word hypocrisy, but not emotionally and not reactively, which I would have done in 2025. But we're going to define it precisely because hypocrisy in leadership isn't about being evil. I know some of our, leaders I'm like, oh my God, that person is just evil. It's not about being evil. It's about misalignment. And when misalignment under authority, and misalignment under authority always has consequences, is what I meant to say. So, what hypocrisy actually is? So, hypocrisy, especially in leadership, is about values and behavior, and especially about behavior incongruence under power. It's when a leader or an organization or a CEO, whoever is leading, preaches about transparency but operates in secrecy. This, leader or organization and the upper people demand accountability, but they deflect responsibility. They promote wellness, but create burnout. I know that as a health professional, that has been one of the biggest things for us. Like, promote wellness, promote calm, promote all this. But the organization and the leaders continue promote and create burnout. They talk about collaboration, but silence is a dissent. They enforce standards, but they don't model the standards. And here is the truth: your team who's working under you definitely sees the gap. Even if they don't say it, even if they still smile, even if they still comply, they see it all. And once people see a repeated gap between words and actions, they stop trusting the words. So to start with, okay, let's cancel that. Okay. So to start out, what exactly is integrity and what it is not? First of all, integrity is not about perfection. As a matter of fact, it's far from perfection. Integrity is about congruence. Integrity means saying, you know what, when I misstep, I acknowledge it. When I expect something, I model it. When I make a mistake, I repair it. When standards shift, I explain why. Perfection, on the other hand, says, oh, I never get it wrong. Integrity says, when I get it wrong, I own it and I correct it. And here is something that leaders miss: repair builds more trust than pretending nothing ever happened. I think one of the things about integrity and what is so frustrating about the people who see the misalignment is often this: the rules are for you, but not for me dynamic. So let's talk about something simple. It is February right now, and it is winter, and there is snow for a lot of the parts of the country here. So imagine it is your office day, it is not your work from home day. And imagine you are in a snowstorm, which is very much here in the Midwest. Imagine a snowstorm and the roads are slippery, the roads are unsafe, traffic is backed up because everybody is going slow. And staff are required to report on time. And if they're late, even like 10, 15 minutes, they must use their leave, put in their leave. Meanwhile, leadership works remotely. The issue isn't flexibility right here. The issue is the asymmetry without transparency. So, if the rule applies differently because of operational necessity, explain it. But when sacrifice is demanded downward and flexibility is exercised upward without acknowledgement, integrity fractures. The thing is, I think a lot of people resent, or the misunderstanding is that employees resent hierarchy. They don't resent hierarchy; they understand it. What they resent is the unequal standards disguised as fairness. And once integrity is questioned, every future decision is filtered through suspicion. So, another example of this that was so discussed in 2025, I said discussed, I hope, is the return to office mandates. So, this no so many people are pushing back against the return to office, and again, I can totally see why, because we see this pattern over and over again with return to office mandates. We hear the ones who are promoting the office return to office mandates, and the leaders say, oh, we need collaboration, or culture happens in person, or innovation requires proximity. But, the leaders are saying all this, but their employees are observing, oh, but executives are operating hybrid, or even worse, when they are flying in occasionally with a private plane. I think we know which organization I'm talking about here, or are maintaining flexibility. The issue here isn't about policy. It's the misalignment between messaging and modeling. Real leadership models the standard. Performative leadership imposes it. So, through all of this, a lot happens to employees. What does the inconsistency do to people's nervous systems? Your team, believe it or not, can handle strict leadership. They can handle high standards. What they cannot handle is unpredictability, the selective enforcement, the mood based reactions, rules that apply differently depending on rank, values that shift depending on optics, and inconsistency creates nervous system instability. When employees spend more time scanning your reactions as a leader than doing their work, that's not a productivity problem. That's a regulation problem at the top. The thing is, unsafe environments are not always loud. Sometimes they're very inconsistent. So let's talk about this. In working with leaders, one thing became very apparent is that a lot of leaders inherited leadership conditioning. And here is the nuance about this is most leaders are not intentionally hypocritical. They inherited templates. They inherited that control equals competence, that emotional suppression equals professionalism, that authority equals exemption, or that image protection equals stability. Loyalty equals silence. That under pressure, those templates eventually surface. And leaders, unfortunately, become someone they didn't consciously choose to be. The hardest part isn't I made a mistake, it's I participated in something misaligned. And that realization requires internal safety. So, we talk about internal safety so much for our employees, like the psychological safety for employees. But very few organizations cultivate internal safety for leaders also. Internal safety for leaders means hearing feedback without retaliation, admitting error without identity collapse, tolerating shame without defensiveness, separating ego from authority, and remaining regulated, especially under criticism. The thing is, without internal safety, accountability becomes performative. And people know when repair is scripted. So, let's say we see and we hear this so much like in the media and companies that we're probably currently working at or have worked at. If a leader actually says, you know what, I take responsibility. Okay, wonderful that you took responsibility. But what is changing? Yes, I take responsibility, but nothing changes. So when nothing changes and it's all just lip service, no action, trust erodes faster. Because the thing is, integrity requires behavioral correction, not just verbal acknowledgement, which a lot of people are good at the verbal acknowledgement, but not the behavioral correction. So, what happens when misalignment escalates? Well, hypocrisy compounds, and this shows through engagement declines, high performance exits, silence among your workers increases, formal complaints emerging, potential for whistleblowing escalates, legal exposure grows, public scandals erupts, and the thing is, scandals are really sudden. It really compounds, and they are often the final stage of ignored internal distress. Integrity breakdown is not just a morale issue, it's a risk issue also. So, let's talk about the ethics versus integrity. There's what is the difference between ethics and integrity? Ethics tells you what is right. Integrity determines whether you live it or not. And, as a therapist, as a clinical social worker, I have a code of ethics. I have a code of ethics as a social worker, as a therapist. We all have our code of ethics. And as a company, you can have your policies, you can have your values on the wall as an organization, but if your behavior does not align with those standards, especially when it costs you something, your integrity is absent. And employees feel the gap, especially if they're licensed professionals, and especially if we're in healthcare, as I mentioned, being a licensed independent clinical social worker. We have professional boards that we are bound by. And for those who answer to these regulatory bodies, when their professional ethics conflict with the organizational behavior, moral injury intensifies. And that's not about feelings. This is about identity. So let's talk about the respect versus compliance. And there's a difference between enforced respect and earned respect. Enforced respect comes from hierarchy. Earned respect comes from congruence. So, yes, employees comply with authority. They trust integrity. Trust generates discretionary effort. Compliance generates minimum effort. And many organizations confuse quiet compliance with loyalty. It's not loyalty, it's containment. So, integrity is about ownership, and it's asking, and it's saying if morale is low, if people are disengaged, if tension is constant, if trust feels thin, the question is not what's wrong with them, putting the accountability on your people. It's where is the gap between what we say and what we reward. Leadership realignment begins when you stop outsourcing responsibility for the culture you are experiencing. Integrity is never about being misaligned. As a matter of fact, you know what? It's about recognizing the misalignment quickly. It's about owning it publicly. It's about correcting it behaviorally. So, to close out this episode, I want to say that hypocrisy is not a personality flaw. It is an unexamined misalignment under power. And misalignment under authority always shows up in culture. People don't need flawless leaders. What they need regulated leaders, accountable leaders, transparent leaders, congruent leaders, leaders who actually model what they expect. Because integrity builds trust, hypocrisy erodes it, alignment restores it, and lead with alignment, lead with regulation, lead with accountability, and most importantly, lead with integrity. So, that is all I have for this week's leadership and mental well being in the workplace. And again, this episode is really meant to educate and not to say, not at all, that leadership is perfect. As a matter of fact, the more that you acknowledge that, you know what, we're not perfect, we're human. There's so many things that we need to work on, and to say it and say, but you know what, even though we say it, we're going to work on correcting this. We're going to work on how do we find the alignment for all of this. And as a leader, your people respect you because more if you actually lead and live with ethics and integrity. So, again, this is your own pathway where leadership is owned, presence matters, and power is used responsibly. I will see you all next time. Take care.